Great. All right, thanks.
10 minutes for you? Okay. No, 10 minutes, please.
Just so the three of you know, the microphone is on both for the audio for the room in here as well as the computer audio, so that Harold can hear you and can respond to our first two speakers.
Okay. All right. Now I would suggest let's get going because we're on time now. All right.
So Yves, if you would please join me as the moderator.
Yeah, if you want.
There we go. So, folks, I'd like to thank you all for... What am I getting feedback on? Can you mute that for me? Function F2. Thanks, Cor. So if we can just find our seats, we're going to get started again. I'd like to introduce Yves Gassot from IDATE, who will be our moderator for the fourth panel this afternoon, and he will introduce the speakers and we'll get going. So thank you, and I hope everybody's enjoying their day.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As I was explaining it this morning, a common issue both sides of the Atlantic is the consolidation that we know. So this session will be focused on this topic. We will not talk only about telecommunication consolidation, but we will try to have a global vision taking into account mergers and operation in the content side of the new value chain. And for this reason, we will start with Professor Noam. Let me say just that one of our speakers was really sorry not able to join the panel. Mr. Vianney from Orange was one of the victims of the important Air France strike in Paris. So he was really sorry, and he said that he will find another opportunity for joining the city event. But he gave me some element of his speech, and I will try to present his vision. But firstly, Elie, if you want to join the floor.
Thank you very much, Yves. It's really a pleasure to deal with our friends from IDATE. And I hope that we will hear a little bit more about IDATE in the beginning of the next panel. It's an important organization of research and consulting and organization in Europe, originating in Montpellier, France. It is now active in many other places in Europe for many important organizations. We participate in their events. They come to ours and join and bring some of the kind of distinguished speakers over from Europe. Unfortunately, they're also subject to the French airline union arrangement, which means that it's always a 50-50 chance if somebody makes it on time, right? So, of course, communications can solve this problem. We also will have a Washingtonian speaker coming in here by video link. So, I will be speaking here about consolidation and a global comparison. It is part of a report of a very large study that we've conducted at the Columbia Business School involving media ownership issues and trends in 30 countries, in 13 industries. We have 60 researchers around the world participating in this. We kind of have the common methodology so that we can compare apples to apples. We have then kind of take these numbers and data and these country chapters and put them together into comparisons and trends and analyses and all kinds of things. And I will report to you really very briefly on this. The overall study is going to come out, and we just literally finished the the edited pages for the Oxford University Press should be out, and it's probably over 1,200 or so printed pages, long book. So, because it will be expensive, I can give you already some of the results for free. So, now why is this interesting and why is it important? Media ownership, partly because everybody gets really excited about it, whether it is in a large country like the United States, where millions of people protest when the FCC approves or disapproves of something, or whether it's a tiny country like Iceland, where media ownership and concentration has led to almost a governmental crisis. And so, in the context of our discussion here and with our French friends here, I think one of the issues to look at is the trend in the push towards a relaxation of media ownership rules, particularly in wireless communications, where the typical arrangement is 4, sometimes even more, sometimes less, and the push now is starting to have a more concentrated industry, and we should kind of look at that. The argument one hears frequently is, look at them in Europe, where the European Commission, or I believe the French government, I'm not quite sure, we'll hear about it, is that, oh, look at America, it's such a larger market, the companies are larger, therefore we in Europe, we have these small companies where we really have to do something in order to gain scale. And so that is a discussion that we should have based on facts, because as you can imagine, people sometimes they look at Europe and they see from America critics and they see wonderful things happening there and they come back and they're kind of glowing. Conversely, Europeans, they come to America, sometimes they find good stuff, they come back or they find bad stuff, and a very selective kind of reception. So we'll try to be here more objective. This is a complicated environment because it consists on the research and political policy level of basically three strands, 3 directions. One are the media pessimists. Those prevail in academia. Virtually everybody in academia who deals with media and ownership is a media pessimist. They think the sky is falling. There was a golden age. We lost it. Rupert Murdoch here and Silvio Berlusconi there or whatever. That is characterized by my good friend and at some point editorialist in the Financial Times. We were alternating here. And Larry Lessig, law professor at Harvard, he basically comes with a conclusion that there will be just 3 companies control more 85% of media. Now, I really have great respect for Larry, but his numbers are just kind of out of thin air. I don't know where he got them. Now, on the other hand, there's the other direction, which are I call them the media optimists. And their position can be summarized in one word: the internet. The internet will solve everything. If you have media concentration, the internet will kind of reduce market power, will kind of Schumpeterian, you know, the story, but it's similar. Educational problem, no problem. Here's a tablet. Social problem, no problem. Here's a cell phone. And so the question really is that correct? This is characterized by Adam Thierer, also a good friend, who kind of writes a good book but he basically says, this is the golden age. There's more diversity, there's more entry, there's more of everything. And maybe that's a little bit too rosy colored too, considering the market shares of some of the largest companies, Google or Amazon or wherever you look in their particular market niches. And then there's a third position, which is to say not just this is happening or this is not happening, but rather we need it. We need concentration. Why do we need concentration? Because it's a good thing. We need scale, we need scope, we need globalization, we need a presence, we need national culture, we need protection against the Americans. Whatever the arguments are, we need scale. And that often is an argument heard, and I find it sometimes really inconsistently, though, in Brussels and sometimes in Paris. And it has led historically to some efforts, for example, in France, and I'm not kind of picking on our French friends just because they're here so that they can have a chance to also to relate to it, because we can talk about the Germans, but they're not here to defend them. No, actually, we do have Bernd here. Okay, so where the French government, goes back now, tried to establish a computer industry to fight IBM. IBM at that time, 80s now, was kind of like the big bad person, and the French had a little bit of an obsession with its market power, and so they kind of put together this company, Groupe Bull, in order somehow to be a counter to IBM. Well, of course, the stuff failed miserably. However, kind of somebody did challenge IBM, and there was kind of like Apple, okay, without much government kind of assistance, and Microsoft, and as you know the rest of the story. But on the other hand, sometimes it does work better. Alcatel, not represented here, but basically was kind of also put together with other European operations and pushing out some Americans from ITT and so on, but eventually it became a real big player in France, in Europe, around the world, even in the United States. Okay, so sometimes it works. Now, so when we did our study, kind of some of the questions were kind of, so who are these big companies? So I'll ask you, who's the largest owner of media in the world? And most people will say Murdoch or Redstone or Malone, but this actually is the largest media owner in the world. Not just close, by a vast margin. A large country, the government controls most media. And so when you talk to Chinese about that, they will say, well, there's the Ministry of Defense. That's really very different from the Ministry of Education and Science. These are different operations. But come on. I mean, you can say the same thing about HBO and Time Warner and Turner, right? And who are the largest private owners in the world? When you say this, people will give you the same answer, but this is the real answer. It's State Street, it's Vanguard, it's Fidelity, it's those. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong. I have too many laptops here. So the largest by the Chinese government, and the largest private media owner, State Street and Vanguard and Fidelity. These are large investment companies. They own trillions of dollars. They manage them for their investors, and they own 10 billion here and 17 billion there, and they're in turn run by people who've never heard of, probably, Hooley and McNabb. So people like that. Those are people who are actually, if you think about it, then run the companies that own the media. Now, they don't operate, they don't manage, that is true, but in pure ownership terms. Now, let me move on, though, to the question at hand here, which is, are media more concentrated? And the next question will be, how do they compare with each other, and how does the U.S. compare with Europe? So on the first question, are media becoming more concentrated? Whoa, no way. We have more time now because we have an extra. Okay, so first of all, the content media, not platforms, so not telecom and mobile and so on. Content media rose by a fairly considerable number of HHI by every year. And whereas for platform media, telecom, ISPs, cable as a platform, they actually declined. So notice the two trends. Platforms decline slightly. Content increases fairly much. However, the content is declining from a much higher level. So the two are kind of converging. Content more, platform less. Now, how does the United States compare? Well, here too, the platform industries did decline. That's actually really good news. Platform concentration from a very high level decline to a still very high level, but at least the direction is good. But when it comes to the content, its content increased in concentration twice as high, twice as fast as the rest of the world from a lower level. And that does not include the recent deals. And so let me just say a word about that because people are interested about that. And so on those recent deals, which is the AT&T DirecTV and the Charter Comcast Time Warner cable, that would together raise the HHI by 588 points, an increase of 33%, a fairly considerable increase, that is, a fairly considerable increase. Now, the AT&T merger to me is less of an issue because it's the number 2 company and it's kind of on a national level, it doesn't really make much difference. On a local level, there would be occasionally some problems, but that can be dealt with. The Comcast Charter Time Warner cable, that creates, in my mind, a kind of a greater problem. But this is not perhaps the time here to discuss this, although if we do it later. Okay, now, let me now compare some European and American situations. If you look at multi-channel platform, kind of cable, satellite, IPTV, you will see that North America, which is here defined as Canada and the US, are considerably lower than is Europe, okay? And just look at France, where you have, let's say you have, what's the cable company that has, Numericable is basically has the entire cable market. And on satellite, it's Vivendi, right? That is basically, so you have one monopoly in each and they compete against each other. True. Okay, now, if you look at wireline, you also see that the American companies are considerably lower. If you look at wireless, you also see that the American markets are considerably lower, although the trends here are, if you can see, America is going up, Europe is coming down. I have this on a country-by-country basis, but it's just too much information here. I have it on this level. If you look at absolute size, you will see that the Chinese operation is really by far the largest. There are 2 companies, but they're basically owned by the same people, namely the government. AT&T is large, Vodafone is large, but you have about 10 companies in the same order of magnitude. It is true, the Vodafones, the Oranges, the NTT, the Telefonicas, the Telmex, the Deutsche Telekom, and so on. Those are companies that are fairly large. They're not hugely large worldwide. They're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%, but they're kind of in the same ballpark size-wise. Telefonica might not be the largest in the world, but it is kind of in many countries, and so it adds up. Now, here you can look at the worldwide trends, and you can see for platforms, they're all highly concentrated, and most of them are kind of reducing their concentration. Some of them are increasing their concentration, including the United States. Not good. France is decreasing its concentration considerably, as you can see there in the box. When it comes to content media, well, okay, for reasons of time, I won't discuss this. Now, when you look at the convergence, you will also see that the companies, we kind of statistically, we have calculated that their variance from their mean has kind of declined considerably, and from country to country, from company to company, from industry to industry. So there are indeed convergences taking place around the world, across countries, across industries. Low concentration countries becoming more concentrated, high concentration, less, and similar for industries. Convergence around the fact that industries becoming more high capital intensive, and I talked about this earlier. So as you can see here, concentration strongly correlated with capital intensity. Okay, now I have more to show you, but I will skip that only with the observation that one of the things that we did in the study was to adjust for countries different size, different richness, different educational level, all these factors that people say, oh yeah, sure, we are more concentrated, but we are poorer, we are larger, we are smaller, whatever it is. So we factor all these things in, and you can see some industries some countries are really highly concentrated, and usually France is kind of at the bottom, but in film, actually, it is quite high up there. France should be the line, the horizontal line, when it comes to film, should be pretty much in the middle there on that line, but it's not. In terms of concentration of its film industry, it is right high up there. Why? There's an answer to that. It is Canal+. Canal+ has essentially enjoyed for many years a either legal or de facto monopoly, and so that has led to this concentration. And so, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I have not been able to detect a high concentration in America that Europeans should emulate. It's actually a little bit the other way around. And so if that's the argument, it is not a strong argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Elie. I will not challenge all your comments, maybe the last one about Canal+. No, I don't share the vision that Canal+ is in a monopoly situation. Canal+ is focused on a specific video market, which is the pay TV. It's a little like if you say that HBO is a monopoly in the TV in US. If you are looking at the size of the TV market in France, Canal+, it's not a big company.
In its production capacity, through its production and financing arm, it is actually accounts for a very large share of French film production. A significantly larger share than any of the Hollywood majors in their own country or around the world.
Okay. We will continue the debate together. I will try to complement the presentation about the consolidation landscape now with a focus on the telecommunication industry, and have in mind that the size of the telecommunication industry, even if we are taking into account only the services market, is between 2 and 3 times the size of the content and TV market services. So let me present the agenda I suggest. Firstly, I will introduce the debate about where are the drivers behind the consolidation, what we can see today in this telecommunication industry, and focusing particularly my comments about the situation in Europe, and to show that the context and the drivers are not the same one in Europe and in US. And then I will talk about the various formats that we can have for consolidation, because it's not the same thing when we are talking about cross-border or domestic consolidation, mobile consolidation, or fixed or mobile consolidation. I will come back on the specificity of Europe to talk about antitrust attitudes. It's very important because we can talk about regulation, but the reality today, and I think it's a common issue in US and in Europe, is that it's not the regulation which is important, it's the antitrust authorities which have really the cards in hands. So all the operation in terms of merger and acquisition are a unique opportunity for the public authorities to have impact about the next structure of this digital industry. And at the end, I want to say that even if consolidation are important, we cannot talk about the future of telecommunication only about consolidation, and there are many other issues to find a dynamic room place for the telecom industry in the new digital chain. So I was explaining that it's not the same situation in Europe to talk about the drivers of the consolidation. We are finishing a big report for the French authorities to explain the gap we have between Europe and telecommunication. Let me show you some figures. I will not take the time to talk about why we are in such a situation. It's, of course, the very interesting debate, but I think that the figures and the debate, the figures and the data are also very important. If we come back to the last 5 years, the revenue of the telecommunication in Europe, focusing, restricting Europe to the 5 biggest market, Germany, UK, Italy, Spain, and France. The revenue have decreased more than 12% for fixed, wireline, and wireless sectors in 5 years. Of course, it was not the same dynamic in US. And it's mainly based on the gap that we have seen in the mobile, which was the real driver of our industry during the last 2 decades. But you should say that revenue is important, but more important is the margin. If we are looking at the margin, I would say that the gap is still more important, as you can see on these figures. And if you can read the data I have added, the mobile telecommunication industry has produced more than $20 billion in terms of EBITDA in addition since 2006, and we have lost more than 12 billion euro in the same times. Very often, this question is hidden by the ratio which are used, because we are talking in terms of EBITDA margin, EBITDA on the revenue. But because the revenues are decreasing, even if you have the same ratio, you don't have the same margin. And it's very important when we are talking about debt, because as you may know, this industry, by the financial markets, are mainly analysis by the level of debt and the capacity to produce free cash flow. And the same logic to analyze the consequence in terms of investment. As you can see, if we are considering the 5 biggest European markets, which are representing the same population we have in the United States, and if we are considering the investment, the capex made last year, it's 2 times more important in the United States. Maybe it's less efficient. Maybe the country, the geography of the country is not the same, but the gap is still there. So we are in a weak context for the telecommunication services in Europe, and it's true that there is a relationship with the market structure, even if the economy of scope is not all to explain the thing. Even if when we are analyzing the concentration, we are using HHI index, in which we don't take into account the size of the players, and it depends really if you are making the exercise at the European level or at each national market. If you are looking at each national market, the concentration index is the same in Europe as in US. Of course, if you are looking at the European level, we have more than 140 mobile operators in Europe, and the concentration is very weak. But beyond the fact, because the relevant market is not the European one, but is the national one, we cannot forget the size of the players, and in US you have 4 global players for the wireless market for 320 inhabitants. If we are taking the average size of our 5 biggest European countries, it's something like 54 or 60 million of inhabitants, and we have also 4 players in each market. It's true that some players like Vodafone or Deutsche Telekom or Orange and Telefonica are multinational players. But even if we are taking into account this investment outside of their domestic market, the reality is that you don't have the same synergies in terms of size, economy of scope, if you are on various national market and if you are in the same national market. If we go on taking into account the market structure for wireline, it's very different because there is a risk of duopoly or monopoly in US. It's at the local level and not at the national level, because the big difference is that in Europe we are working toward convergence with national wireless and wireline players. Here, if you have a global player for the cellular market, you have regional or local, even if they are very big players, telcos, for the wireline. No, I have no time. I'm shifting directly to show that there are, of course, many differences between the operation that we learn now every week. The focus in Europe is mainly on the mobile consolidation, because as you have seen, the big problem we have for now 5 years is mainly in this mobile national market with too intensive activity. But yeah, I have to stop. I know I will finish my sentence. But we are in front of the antitrust. Yes, it's another figures I have done for you, but I will not comment it. The national authorities in charge of the telecommunication have a static analysis, and the paradox in Europe is that to go toward pan-European operation, cross-border operation within the European Union, firstly, the player has to be in a better situation, and to be in better situation, they have to organize their national market. And at the same time, the national authorities say, yes, we are for pan-European players and for cross-border operation, but we cannot support presently national domestic consolidation, because it will be bad for the consumers. And there are some remedies which are now proposed by the NRA and by the European Commission, but they had some ambiguities to the debate. We have seen in Germany the most important market, a consolidation with the authorization of the European Commission between the third and the fourth cellular players, but it was with remedies which give big opportunities to MVNO business, which is still very important, with more than 20% of the market share in Germany, to get access to more spectrum. And there is a contradiction with the decision to support a policy more oriented toward investment and innovation. I'm sorry, I'm too long. I stop now my comments, and we will go on, maybe if we have still time, by questions. But I have now to introduce to introduce the third speaker, and I think that the speaker is not with us here in this room, but he is in Washington. Is it
Washington.
correct? Could you give?
I just want to make sure it works. Harold, can you hear us? Somebody screwed something up, of course. Harold, can you hear us?
It was very fun. Very good. Very good.
It shouldn't be. Harold, can you hear us? There we go.
I can hear you.
Yes, now we can hear you, Harold.
Good. Yes. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harold Field. You are Senior Vice President of Public Knowledge. Thank you to be with us. You have the floor.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, please.
All right. So thank you very much. My name is Harold Feld. I'm Senior Vice President for Public Knowledge, which is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We deal with issues of trying to ensure an open and ubiquitous internet where we can people can access information with a minimum of intermediation, and also can produce information with a minimum of intermediation. I also have experience of many years in traditional media concentration policy, particularly in content, as Eli was discussing earlier, but also platform issues. What I wanted to do today, since I do not have statistics on the global market, and since my area of concentration has been primarily that of the United States, is to just speak generally about a number of the concerns that have arisen in our public policy with regard to the consolidation of both distribution platforms and of content production, and raise these as overall concerns. None of these tell us necessarily what is the right level of consolidation as against the benefits that have been cited with regard to efficiency, but these are, I think, important considerations. And unfortunately, as I will discuss, the problem has only become more complicated, not less complicated, with the introduction of broadband and of convergence, and our greater understanding of complex economics. So traditionally, and what we have seen is that when we have platform transport networks, there's a tremendous problem in concentration with regard to interconnection, interoperability, and the ability to leverage the platform either to benefit one's own products if you're vertically integrated, or to others in exchange for a fee. The classic example in American antitrust policy is the railroads of the 19th century, where initially you had a competition among railroads. Gradually the railroad industry consolidated. When you have consolidation, you go through this sort of very interesting cycle with networks in particular, where initially all networks are starting and they're the same size, and therefore there is incentive to cooperate as much as there is incentive to compete. Because everybody is trying to reach everyone, so interconnection is beneficial to everybody. Generally, in a regime where you have broad interconnection, you can therefore reach all of the customers. Wherefore, without interconnection, you can reach only a small number of customers, and we've seen this cycle start, both ways. We have seen cycles where, say, in the wireless industry in the United States, initially we needed no interconnection or roaming mandates. no roaming mandates on spectrum. We needed interconnection between wireline and wireless, but we needed no roaming mandates because all of the providers were just starting out. We had a spectrum cap that prevented everybody from meeting their own spectrum needs, and therefore everybody had to contract in the marketplace to do that. We saw this with internet traffic also with regard to the emerging private internet backbones. Everybody was a peer, everybody shared. Nobody was particularly worried about it. The traffic exchanges were relatively equal. We've also seen the reverse happen in the internet world. The initial attempts at internet services, ISPs like Prodigy and CompuServe in the United States, were closed networks. They made it as difficult as possible for interconnection with the idea that they wanted to capture the networks. The early telephone networks did the same thing, where the networks started in a closed system rather than with an open system. What happens is, though, eventually, whether you start with the closed and then somebody like AOL comes along that's more open, and then we get a push towards more open because people like having more options, or you start with open as we did with wireless roaming, you eventually reach a point, if you have consolidation, where a couple of players are so much bigger than everybody else that the comparative benefit of interconnection and interoperability shift, and it's still potentially mutually beneficial for the largest players to exchange traffic, but it is to the benefit of all of them to weed out the smaller potential competitors, and that effect multiplies. So one traditional concern that has emerged multiple times in consolidation has been, do you reach a tipping point in the consolidation of the transport platform where the traditional behavior starts to change? And in regulatory terms, the problem has been, particularly in the last 20 years, when things are going well, everybody assumes that's how it's going to be forever. Everything's going great. Why would you do anything when there's a problem? Consolidation, as we've seen in a number of these industries, happens incredibly quickly when it happens. In the United States, in the wireless industry, when we listed the spectrum cap, it took about 5 years for concentration in the industry to change markedly and produce a universe where two players were significantly ahead of everybody else. And you can have that sort of collapse. It can take regulators unaware, especially in an environment where there is resistance to ex-ante regulation. The additional problems that occur, and we've seen, are the ability, as I say, to leverage this for vertical integration for related products. The classic historic example, as I alluded to earlier in the United States, is the railroads, where Carnegie formed the steel monopoly, and Rockefeller formed an oil monopoly by securing preferential rates as against rivals on the railroad transport cartel, and by driving up the rates to rivals by through a deal with a transport cartel, they were able to form monopolies in their own products. So this is a secondary concern is in the related product markets when you're dealing with particularly platforms and transport networks. How does this consolidation impact? Finally, in these industries, there is as you have concentration, you have a tremendous increase in coordinated effects, or the potential for coordinated effects, which means that traditional antitrust measures of the market share of any individual provider may not fully capture the extent to which the parties now engage in essentially oligopolistic or monopolistic behavior. The concern is that particularly when you layer in things like network effects, barriers to entry from consumer lock-in, the still not terribly well understood issues that revolve around two-sided markets, the traditional problem of networks that they have high fixed cost and low marginal cost. The concern is, and we have seen this play out, in the U.S. Policy arena, that you can have a situation such as in our cable industry or in the wireless industry, where by traditional antitrust metrics you have no company has greater than 30 or 40%, but because 3 or 4 companies control collectively 90% of the market, even without the explicit enforcement mechanisms of a cartel, you still essentially have cartel-like behavior and oligopoly because the economics of the industry are very well known. Everybody understands each other's self-interest. There are methods by which they can individually punish each other if they start to step out of line, even without an explicit cartel coordination mechanism. So the dangers of coordinated effects in concentration of these industries is notably enhanced. Convergence was touted as the great anodyne of this. The notion was we had all kinds of cartels or monopolies in the United States, the telephone monopoly, the cable monopoly. The convergence would allow everybody to get into everybody else's business. Convergence did not, in fact, solve problems. It made problems more complicated. A number of reasons for that, in my opinion. Some of them have to do with asymmetric regulation. For various historic and policy reasons in the United States, we made it very easy to switch your phone number and very hard to switch your video provider. So when we had convergence, the telephone companies did worse than the cable companies. There are also barriers to entry that can emerge, such as spectrum licensing, where once the spectrum's bought up, it's gone, and therefore there is no opportunity for a new entrant. And you may have spectrum auctions going forward, but at that point you're dealing with a more mature industry. It's very hard, and the ability to extract value out of the spectrum, and therefore your ability, the price you would rationally pay, is increased when you're already in the industry, as opposed to when you have to incur all of the additional expenses of new entry. So the convergence turned out not to be the great salvation that people had hoped. It only more convergence, more problems, as we might want to say here in the United States. It made things much more complicated and created the potential for cross-sector monopolies and oligopolies rather than enhancing greater competition. Finally, a word about content, because that is critically important. Content industries and content production have create particular issues with regard to concentration because of their impact on democracy, on self-governance. Even in the realm of entertainment, they shape how we view ourselves and imagine our society. The problem is, even without nefarious intent, for example, accusations that the BBC coverage of the Scottish independence referendum was designed to influence the outcome. That's an example where a large platform presumably has a political motive to actually engage in some form of discrimination, but you can simply have market failure. The fact in the United States that the mass market is white means that certain forms, if you are engaged in mass market marketing of your content, it means that is the market that you will aim for. And other voices, such as Latino voices, African American voices, which constitute much smaller shares of the market, are less likely to be met in a more concentrated market. Now, economists will say, well, if there's a market available, people will go for it. But there has been the problem is that when you are large and concentrated, it is difficult for smaller niche players to emerge. They have to compete against these entities with greater economy of scale, and there are other barriers to entry that emerge. And in addition to that, the surviving smaller markets may not be served simply because they are not deemed to be worth it by the remaining large concentrated players. And this creates serious and significant social issues with broad social ramifications and concerns for democracy, as I've said, self-governance, but also just tolerance and marginalization of particular communities and issues. Finally, because I know I'm running a bit over time here, to just sort of wrap things up, Eliam referred to the more positive view. What about the internet? YouTube as a platform allows all of these marginalized speakers to form their audiences. In terms of evaluating the how to measure these things and the policy outcomes, the jury is still out. Certainly the market is dynamic and changing. We hear constantly that certain media are dead, even though they have audience shares that are huge. We hear constantly that people don't care about time of things or where they get it. It turns out when we survey, people do care. People are discriminating. They use them in different ways. And the ultimate question, particularly with regard to content and content concentration, is if you have a universe where it turned out one of the interesting things, as we discovered when we shifted from broadcast to cable and therefore expanded the number of outlets for content, that even though the market share for broadcast was smaller than it had been when the 3-4 broadcast networks constituted the total market, their actual the value of that share was enhanced significantly, because even though they were now a network station might now be only capturing 15% of the market rather than 30 or 40% of the market, that 15% was such a large portion of the, gave you so much bang for the buck compared to the, fractional percentages you can get on the 500 basic cable channels, that it had the curious effect of actually enhancing the ability of these surviving concentrated, but at a much less concentrated market overall by traditional measures, of enhancing their overall power. Similarly, we face concerns with regard to YouTube and these other platforms. They can certainly be very powerful. They can provide very important route arounds for the traditional intermediation that occurs in the media. But at the same time, it is also necessary to be wary that for the most part, their fragmented nature may not offset or may impact differently the concerns about democracy that we have with concentration from a few larger content generators. So thank you very much. Sorry to go over long on that.
Thank you very much,
Hello?
Harold, for your broad
Thanks, Harold.
presentation of your analysis. I think we can say that you belong to the pessimist type of analyst of the situation if we follow the definition of the different vision of Eli, but you are, of course, totally in your role in this presentation. You have an handicap. You are not with us this afternoon here in New York, so maybe we can take one question of one reaction from the attendees. Yeah, of course. Micro.
This is a real open-ended question. In the sessions before, we talked about some parts of telecommunications absolutely unlikely to succeed through competition. For those parts, whether we talk about a monopoly of high speed in 25% of the US or backhaul in Alaska, what's the right thing to do?
Harold, did you get that?
Harold, are you still there?
I think Harold's disconnected, unfortunately.
I'll throw that question to the rest of the panel.
Well,
Thank you.
let's go.
Eli, do you want to?
I need to understand the question again.
How about Eli, while you think about it?
What to do for the 25% of people who don't have access to high-speed access, or for people in Alaska who are in front of a monopoly to get access to broadband? Is a consolidation an answer?
It's an important question, but I don't think it's all that difficult to deal with. I mean, we know how to do these things. They're just kind of, it's basically a universal service type question, and you can do that in a variety of ways. You can generate some subsidy mechanisms. They can be generated from a tax mechanism, or they can generate it internally by some kind of form of requiring some average pricing. I mean, it's kind of like the old style telecom type system. That's one way. Another way is to go by kind of new technologies. We heard, for example, from Facebook, the aviation type approach, the airplanes. I mean, you can send some planes and trains and automobiles out there into outer Alaska and to provide that. Now, kind of a third issue, of course, is to ask the question, and I'm sure that Heather has her opinions about that too, which is kind of like, is it reasonable to expect that the same service grade would be available on the north slope of Alaska than it is in Manhattan below 59th Street? I mean, after all, it costs a lot more to park a car here than to park a car there. So there are certain inequities, and they cannot be only resolved in a direction that whatever they don't have, they get, but whatever we don't have, like parking spaces, we don't get. And so there are some locational choices that people make. Sometimes they don't make them; they're just kind of stuck with them, and they have advantages and disadvantages. So that kind of would be my observation: a combination of technology, subsidy, and that's just the way it is type approach.
Okay, I share totally the view of Eli. Maybe to organize a transition with the next speakers. I will share with you the reaction we can have from Europe when we're looking at the wireline market structure here. It was very efficient, the cable telco competition during the last decade. If we are looking at some figures in terms of home pass for broadband, thanks to the cable importance here in the market. But if we are looking for the futures, we can have a real question about the capacity of this cable telco tango to be in situation to keep this level of duopoly and limited competition, to increase investment and to go toward the high-speed market. We have seen the data presented by the chairman of FCC 2 weeks ago, showing that if we are looking at the household which enjoy more than 50 megs of broadband services, there is mainly one provider. And so in 5 years, when the relevant relevant market for broadband will be high-speed access at 100 megs and more, we will have for maybe 40% of the household in United States only the cable which we will be able to provide something, except if the big telcos are coming back to investment in wireline, which is not very sure till now. So all the concentration of the regulation on the intermodal competition between cable and infrastructure, maybe it's a weakness for the future of the competition. But I give the floor now to Lorenzo Pupillo, who is coming also from Europe. Lorenzo is Executive Director for Public and Regulatory Affairs in Telecom Italia.
Okay. Thank you, Yves, and thank you, Eli, for the invitation to join this conference. It's always nice, at least once a year, to come to New York, for the ITI board, also for this conference. What I'm going to do today is explain why we think it's important in Europe to promote the consolidation of the European telecom industry, and I will assess some of the policy issues. Two basic messages that I would like to leave today. First of all, we need to promote the consolidation in Europe, to be able to exploit, to capture the dynamic efficiency, because we think at the moment we are not doing that. The second message is that the growing role of over-the-top in Europe, also worldwide, require a new approach from regulators when they evaluate the consolidation process. Okay? So, let's start with this slide. This maybe can be a bit controversial, you know. We compare USA with Europe, and we have in Europe 500 million inhabitants, 160 fixed broadband operator, more than 100 mobile operator. In the USA, there are 320 million inhabitants, 16 fixed broadband operator, 4 mobile operator. Now, you know, we can compare, you know, what we are comparing, what? Europe with the USA. I think that if we think that for us the goal is the European market, the integrated market, it's clear that this slide definitely shows that at the moment we are not exploit scale economy in Europe, you know, and this sector requires that, and so we have to we look at consolidation as a way to do that. Okay. The first message is we need to promote healthy concentration in Europe to capture dynamic efficiency. At the moment, for instance, in the mobile market, if you compare US and Europe, you find out that, for instance, consumer in Europe pay less per month in terms of rates, but use but 5 times less the mobile phone than the US. In the US, there is a better growth investment than in Europe. We have a faster, I mean, in the US, there is a faster data connection speed, and also the deployment of LTE is going a much faster pace. I think this is something to do with a market that's able, also a regulatory framework that help in capture the dynamic efficiency of this market. In Europe, we think that the current way of applying competition law in the mobile sector perpetuates existence of unsustainable network operator. 20-33% of mobile operator, especially the small one, are not sustainable even after several years of market entry. Instead of allowing healthy concentration, regulatory competition authorities often sponsor additional entrants. We know, thinking about in dynamic efficiency terms, too much competition decrease investment, similar to too little competition. There be reduced overall consumer wealth, and so the problem is to find the right balance between the right level of investment and the right level of competition. Current approach of network sharing allow to generate some benefit, but is not a real substitute for merger. This market inefficiency, the fact that there is no, in other words, consolidation is not promoted, drive down the investment level and the ability to innovate, improve quality and decrease prices. New entrants cannot economically invest in a broad next generation access networks and need to price aggressively to gain ground. But this decreased price reduces economic ability of existing network owners to invest in network upgrade. According to the Boston Consulting Group, a study 2013, instead allowing for healthy concentration and fostering network sharing can lead to an additional free cash flow of about from 40 to 60 billion euro by 2020. So I think that the European Commission should promote in-country across-border consolidation, and to do that should look at a different way to the merger process, looking not only at the short-term effect, but also looking at the long-term and the dynamic benefit of this process. In particular, they should take into account the progressive completion of the single market for electronic communications and the dynamic efficiency that the merger can bring about. Now, the other issue that I want to mention, I mentioned before, was this relationship on how the role that over-the-top are playing and how the role that they play should be taken into account when we consider merger regulation and consolidation process. And I want to make here a comparison because I think it's good because we are in the US, and we are also we are talking about this transatlantic comparison of policies. If all of you know that in the US at the end of the 90s, the competition shift from ILEC versus CLEC to telco versus cable industry. In other words, regulator realized that the most important relevant competition was the inter-platform competition. Okay. Now, my claim is that, for instance, in Europe, we should, historically, because they were not there at that moment, we should consider the role that over-the-top are assuming, and the role that especially they are playing, not in terms of infrastructure competition, but service competition. And I think that this role should be taken into account when merging, when consolidation process are considered. Indeed, if you look at, before I compare Europe with the US, I say Europe market is very fragmented compared to the US. Now, if you bring in the picture the OTT, you look at, for instance, our friend from Facebook say we are 1.3 billion customers. These are like a continent, you should take into account this, the potential effect, the market this over the top have when you analyze this process of merging and consolidation. We are talking about a billion of customers, and this should be taken into account. For instance, we see at the moment there are strongly asymmetry in regulation. For instance, when analysis of consolidation is carried out, for the case of Telefonica and E+, were much more demanding in terms of requirement than, for instance, the acquisition of WhatsApp from Facebook. The European Commission is reluctant to endorse consolidation at national level. Therefore, the telco market is very fragmented against a very consolidated and global over-the-top market. EU merger control is subject to revenue threshold in member state, but this revenue threshold becomes meaningless in case of operation involving over the top because they don't declare revenue in the EU. Overall, there is this asymmetry between ex-ante regulation to ensure competition in telecom market versus what the OTT are required to do. So there is an extremely fragmented telecom market against a very concentrated over-the-top market. A commercial negotiation between the parties are affected by the different market power of the players.